For this assignment, the first thing you should do, and for any assignment, is to read the assignment carefully. So for this assignment, we are in legal research and writing is the name of the assignment. You are to create an outline of a case brief. What does that mean? So you need to think about what types of case briefs are we talking about? What is a case brief? So as mentioned in class, we talk about briefs in a couple of different ways. You might be writing a brief to the court, which is a long, lengthy document where you're explaining everything about your case and the arguments that go with it. That's when we talk about the noun of what a case brief is with the court. This is, you are going to learn how to brief a case and that you create a case brief from that. So this is the summary for this case brief. It is a summary of the case. We use the IRAC method to create a case brief of a case. That's the case brief that we're talking about. So you're creating an outline that you will use to be able to understand and to summarize a case. So this should be created as a template that you can use for any case that you read. So make sure there are parts that it's clear that you can fill in and directs you for each section that you create. Include headings and then the definition of that heading. Then also questions that you should ask in order to be able to complete that section of the brief. So if the first heading is issue, you would have the heading issue, define what an issue is, and then ask yourself questions. How do I go about finding that issue? What's the best way to do that? Make sure you look at the book. They take you through this whole process for briefing a case and using IRAC, so make sure you take a look at the book. I am also going to include a couple of articles that will take you through this as well. Include also, in addition to all of that, include tips that we talked about both in our synchronous class, but also in the recorded session when I talked about legal research and writing, and specifically when I talked about IRAC, but it's in both. But include those tips for strong legal writing in each section. Refer back to your notes from chapter 9. That it goes all the different things that you thought about with that. What is your audience? What are ways to make a stronger sentence? Include things about passive voice, things like that. The last part of this just says you'll be using the template in the next modules as you read. So you want to make sure it's good because we know we are going to use this. So let's take a look at some samples that I just pulled off online, and I'll include here in the assignment for you. This is from a bar association, a student bar association from a law school. Following briefs are designed to provide students with guidance how to brief a case. So that's what we're doing. They're not meant to suggest it's the only way. Here is a really important part. If a professor suggests you brief in a different manner, follow their direction. So in the presentation, I talked about specific words that you should use. Those are the words that we are going to use. Those are the words that you should include in here. Don't pretty them up. Don't change them. Use the words that I've instructed you to use. Do not add additional words to those phrases. I want you to use those exactly. So here's an example of a case that you can take a look at. It's a case brief that you can take a look at. You do have the title of the case. We didn't say that, but I guess I felt like that was kind of an obvious one. You would want to put the title of the case. You should put the case citation as well. Here they have parties. I don't typically include that. Sometimes that's important, but generally that's not a very important separate heading for me. They have the prior procedure. That's the procedural posture that we talked about in class. You can include that when it's important. I would put the title as procedural posture. I would leave that off for our template for the moment until you get further into things. We're just trying to get the basics. Then they have a section for facts. You can include a section for facts. I think it begins to make it a little bit long. So I would advise you not to at this point. Many people like a facts section. When I'm briefing a case, I'm looking at one issue or the important issues that come up, and I include my facts in the analysis. This is one point of view. You may have many other professors who definitely want the fact section, just so you're aware of that. You'll see that frequently. So here's where we've talked about. So I would include the title of the case. The rest of this stuff is nice to know. Then we talk about the issue. We have talked very specifically about the wording for the issue section, but this is the question that the court is being asked to resolve. So when we talk about issue, remember we have the word whether, and you can put that right in there, whether under New Mexico tort law, blah, 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 and it goes on. This does not, typically when you put the word whether in front of any sentence, is going to be a statement, not a question. So you'd probably not have a question mark here at the end. I can't imagine many cases that would have an issue that will be longer than 3 lines long. So it should be a succinct issue. I also don't love that they have under New Mexico law, because we know typically where the case is from by the case citation itself. I think that's a little bit redundant unless you're in a practice that has multi-state practice. Then you have your rule. The rule here, I disagree with how they're stating it here. The rule is not yes. When they're stating this, that's answering this. Now remember, this is a student bar association, so okay. But no, you don't answer it in the rule, you answer it in the conclusion. But the rule should say, the rule is that an individual may be liable for battery, and you get that. Remember, the rule in our section is also a good place to include a statute or a case. So this is the actual case, this is the actual law. It should not be the rule that the court created from this case. It should be the law that the court relied on to decide this case. So it's not the conclusion in this case that you're actually briefing. It's what law did the court look at to come to that conclusion. Then you have your analysis. This is where we have in our case. In our case, and this is where you put a couple of legally significant facts. What is legally significant? The facts that are necessary to answer your issue. So in here, you're figuring out something about the perpetrator of a battery and inciting them to do the battery. So you would want to include facts about your case that include the battery, right? And the facts that would be important is, did or did they not actually take part in the physical beating? So look at your issue to decide, and the rule to decide, what are the legally significant facts? What facts do you need to know to answer your question by applying that rule? And those are your legally significant facts. Then you continue on, and here you can see in their analysis, by the way, they say therefore. Avoid saying that. That forces you into a conclusion, and that's not where it goes. The conclusion comes down here. Therefore, and this is where I could probably jump up here to their analysis, therefore Emilio is liable for the battery. So you can include, certainly I think it's a good idea to include the disposition of the case, but the conclusion of the court's holding is what they have up here, okay? So really look at this critically, and we could probably give the Student Bar Association a little bit of help in improving this just by those ways. So the conclusions should start with therefore. It can include the disposition, but it should be what the court decided. Then you can see they have notes down here at the end. Well, that's great. You know what? That's what I've asked you to do, to put in some notes. Now, they're talking about the actual case and understanding it, but I've asked you to put in some writing tips. You can put those in as you go under issue, rule, analysis, and conclusion, but you might also find a couple that just kind of don't go anywhere in particular. It's in general. So things like, have I used Times New Roman 12-point font? Have I applied the 1818 rule? Have I run spell check and grammar? This should be a checklist for you to make sure you have done everything you need to do to turn in a fabulous brief. One other example, here you can see they have their facts, they have their issue. The issue is whether a party moving for summary judgment bears the initial burden of production to make a prima facie case, showing the non-existence of a triable issue of material fact. The rule is to show a triable issue, and it goes on. This is I think this is a pretty well-written rule, except for we use the rule is to make it really obvious. The only thing is, I think it's not a bad idea to start putting the case law in right after that, the case law or the statute. If for no other reason, and this is maybe a tip, that will help you make sure that you are pulling the rule from a case that the court that you were in front of relied on. Not the decision of this court, but what case did they rely on, or what statute did they rely on to make their decision. Then you have your application or your analysis. That's where you have, in our case, and you provide a couple of lines of legally significant facts. That is where you really want to tighten it up, much tighter than what they have here. If I was reading this very quickly and grading this, I would say this is wrong, because the application is not where we cite cases. The rule is where we cite cases. We get the rule from the cases. So keep the application as an analysis applying the facts of your case to the issue that you have asked and the rule that answers that. Then you come to the therefore, and here you can see they're again putting that therefore, the conclusion of the court in the application. This is not how I do an application, not how I would argue most do, but this is an example. Instead, put the conclusion down here where the conclusion belongs. You can include the disposition, but also include the court's finding there. So this is just one of the examples that you can use. I'll also put in how to write a case brief for the court. And you can see there are different variations. I don't want to give you too many things because it can get confusing. It's nice to have one way to do it. I've given you one way to do it in our IRAC, but I wanted to give you a sample of what a case brief looks like in the end. And I think this is a good example, just lengthwise, format-wise, a little bit what it looks like with the headings and the content within it. Your template is going to have these headings, issue, rule, analysis, and conclusion, with descriptions of what you should put in there, prompts for you to write a good case brief, which we'll be doing next week.